Thank you for joining Leadership Lessons. Our guest today is Dwight Butler, who has 20 plus years experience as a Kentucky State Representative and now serves as an issues advocate for Kentucky Baptist. Our guest next week will be Dr. Wes Fowler. Dwight, thank you for joining us on Leadership Lessons today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches for churches to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. And so this interview with you, Dwight, is to help folks better understand what's happening in Frankfort and how they can be part of it and how they can pray and how they can support your work. So we're grateful for you. But let me introduce you and talk about you a little bit about your work. So you served for 2 decades as a Kentucky State Representative. So tell us what inspired you to pursue that role.
Well, I was always interested in politics, I guess, from the outside as a young man or a young boy. And mainly my interest was inspired by my uncles, who one was a sheriff and the other was a county judge at one time. And so I would hear these stories whenever they'd get together about things they'd done and different things. And it just kind of planted that seed in me that maybe, I could have a part someday in the public service section. And I also was I was a very visual young man or boy, and so stickers, buttons, things like that. I used to, I've taken my part off of a few light poles and bumpers even after the election was over. But I just always was interested in it. I like the personalities. It just inspired me.
Do you have a collection of bumper stickers and political memorabilia?
Oh yeah.
What's one of your favorites? What's something that you have that you're most proud of?
It's a good question. Probably some of my. I've got one button that a gentleman gave me, a Ford Dole button, and he was the county chairman, and that was the only one he had.
Wow!
And so he gave that to me as a young man, and now, you can buy them now on eBay for just nothing almost. And so I've got a collection. I give those things away to people. And especially politicians like them. So
that's fun. A lot of effort goes into making those items. Well, Dwight, you're also a Christian. You're a believer. So
yes.
Tell us when and how did you become a follower of Jesus?
Well, again, I was raised in a different denomination, and we were more, I guess, centered on being a member of the church than being a Christian to a degree. Or kind of they went hand in hand, we thought. Well, after I got married to my wife, who was a Southern Baptist, and started watching Billy Graham some, very soon after that, I was listening to him and I, accepted Christ. I realized I wasn't a Christian. And through the TV ministry, I accepted Christ, called in, and just, I became a Christian. I gave my life to Christ and realized that I hadn't been before, even though I thought I was.
That's especially pertinent today with so many churches through COVID having gone to a Facebook Live service or live streaming their services that, Billy Graham had no idea he's talking to you when he's preaching that message. And pastors today are preaching to so many people that they may not even realize that they're reaching.
Yes, that's very true. And again, it's so important because I'm even in a group of men. We have a Zoom meeting every Thursday, a Bible study, and I've only met one of the guys, and all the rest are scattered around the country, about 10 of us. And so, but I mean, you become brothers in Christ through that.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
It's a great thing. I really look forward to it.
So you have you served as a state representative for more than 20 years. What's one of your most memorable stories from your time serving as a state rep?
Well, I was thinking about that earlier. Probably the first day that I was in and got sworn in, you go up there and of course you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I'd never been around anything like this before. I tell people I've been to Frankfort one time before, and that was, just to go up there as a visitor. So I didn't know anything about it. And so I'm out here, and first day there's 2 butlers. There's Denver Butler, who was D Butler, and I was DD Butler because I'm Dwight D. And so our votes, they had them switched. He was on the opposite party, so we were going procedurally. Of course, everything was, I'm thinking, what do I need to do here? So I asked my seatmate, He said, well, you need to rise to a point of personal privilege. So, I said, well, tell me what to do. So I stand up, I tell him I rise to a point of personal privilege, which means you've been offended or something has happened. It wasn't quite the thing to do, but I mean, he was. And so anyway, we got it switched. I told him it was. And my mother was up in the gallery, and she said she looked down and saw me standing up there. What in the world is he going to do or say? So I'm probably one of the few that ever rose to a point of personal privilege on their first day by accident.
Dwight, that's hilarious. If my mother would have been there and I would have done that, my mother would have had the exact same thought. Like, what on earth is he about to get us into here as a family? Well, tell us, tell us what's a typical day like for someone who is a state representative, especially during the General Assembly, the time when they meet to carry out their business.
The days are very, very busy, and you will. When I was in there, you would get started. Of course, you go down to usually to the breakfast, really early. They have the cafeteria downstairs, and you get to see a lot of people there. You do your networking. Nobody else, visitors are down there then. It's too early for them. So you get your networking, then you go back up and you start returning or looking through all your mail, looking through all your calls, and just try and stay back in touch, looking at all the bills that you're going to be dealing with on the committees you're on that day. Because, and that's one thing too, the legislators are spread thin like butter over too much bread in a way, because they have so many things to look into that they can't know about all of it. There's no way. So they have to concentrate on their committees, one, of course, their bills and the things they're interested in. And that's why, lobbying or calling them, the constituents, are so important, because they need to hear what you're thinking, because they may not know much about an issue just on the surface. But if they're hearing from a lot of people, and especially from people in their district, they'll take notice. And you can have a big impact on them. And that's just like during this last session, here at the very end, the gaming bill, 6, was coming up, and everybody thought it was dead. Well, then we get word, nothing is dead until the session is completely over. Anything can happen. And so we get word that it's a close vote, and they're thinking about possibly bringing that back up, And that's why, word went out to get on the phones or email and let your legislator know what you think about this, because they need to have some moral support too. I mean, they need to be able to, they can take tough votes, but it's a lot easier to take a tough vote when you've said, well, all these people have contacted me, and that's what they want. So,
well, Dwight, you may have just said it, but what would be something about being a state representative or even a state senator that folks in elected office wished that people on the outside knew about your work that maybe we just don't know or don't understand?
I would say that just how busy they are and how many people are pulling at them. And so you need to stay in touch with them. But during the session, they're very busy. And if you can just, stay in touch or keep that hitting into and let them know what you think, but don't expect to be getting a big long interview or a big long phone call or whatever, because they appreciate that. They want to hear from you, but you just don't have time. The days in Frankfurt are so fast when you're a legislator, because there's something to do all the time. There's always somebody to meet with. There's always somebody to call. There's always a group that you need to take a picture with. And there's always, and in the session, besides that, this is all besides the session, besides what your real business is. And going through and reading the bills and trying to keep up with them and persuade the other legislators. It's hard if you got a bill the way it is now to actually meet them face to face. It's pretty tough because they're scattered all over the place. So if you're working a bill like that, it takes a lot of time.
Well, they're so busy, and then they're working on a number of different bills. And what folks may not know is it's not a full-time job. It's kind of like being a bivocational pastor. It's full-time work, part-time pay. But being a state legislator, it's a lot of work, but you can't make a living off of it. Is that right?
That's true. I mean, and that's one thing that you see. There's a lot of legislators. It's almost going to a system where you almost have to be independently wealthy or retired to do the job. I mean, just like if you're working in a job and you got your responsibility, it's hard to go up anyway to do that because you got to take off, 2 or 3 months a year. A lot of jobs won't do that, but they don't make a lot, and it makes it harder. Their pay. I had a bill one time that would have changed and made it where that their fee, they set their own fee or what they make, which is a bad thing for them and for everybody else because they can't raise it hardly now. They could, and people say, "Oh, they're going to raise it." They won't. If you had an independent commission do that, it would set it where it should be with other vocations in the time. But as long as it stays like it is, it's just like it's got a lid on it, and it'll never change. And so that's going to push more and more to being almost like the House of Lords or something, where it's just a situation. It's an honor to serve, which it is, but it's almost a loss to do it. And I don't know if that's where you want to go or not.
Just reading those bills, you almost have to be a lawyer to be able to read and make sense of a bill because in many cases they've been drafted or at least partially drafted by folks with a strong legal background. So it appears to be a great deal of work. I appreciate those who do it. Dwight, during your time, you served in that role more than 20 years. What's one piece of legislation that you were particularly proud of?
Well, being in the minority, you don't pass a lot of legislation. I was fortunate, I got several bills through, but most of them, I guess you'd say they weren't earth shattering or whatever. Worked on several pieces with different legislators, bipartisan, but it's funny you talked about just what we were talking about earlier about wrecks and car wrecks and processions, funeral processions. The first bill I ever had was given to me by a friend of mine who was an attorney. And again, I didn't know what I was doing. He said, "Okay, introduce this. Here's language." Okay, well, I'm a minority and I shouldn't have got it passed anyway. So went ahead, it's going through the process, and, moving on through, passed through the House, which was amazing. Got over in the Senate and it got stuck in the committee. And here's a lesson on people on what to do too, on legislation. So that wouldn't be heard. And I asked one of my friends, "So what can I do to get something to happen here?" He said, "Well, you need to he said, "Who's the chairman of this committee?" And I told him. He said, "Do you have get a friend of yours to contact the funeral directors in there that he knows in his area, and they'll move it for you." It wasn't long. Bill was called up. One of my, they called him because I was calling him. It wasn't doing any good. I might have been, talking to the wind. And that bill came on through, passed out. Didn't know what I was doing. And it went on and became my first bill, got, passed into law. And it was cutting in funeral processions, somewhat, for respect to keep people from doing that. And that made it where they could have, lights or make it, because there was no laws on it. You could just cut in, you could go in front or do whatever. But so that was, for me, that was pretty memorable. And I got on TV because of it, again, so I'm here in the studio and, Saturday morning looking around and everybody's got on their suits and stuff and shorts, that was an eye opener to me, here it goes to all this matter, just like right here. So, and it was really interesting that, and the last bill I had, again, another one I'd introduced a time or two and I was working on. This was just simply to change the Purple Heart plate from saying a Purple Heart veteran to combat wounded. They had asked some of the groups because people don't know what Purple Heart means, combat wounded. So across the nation, they're changing it. Introduced this thing, it would go up and they would die. It would go up and they would die. Finally introduced it. And so I get a call, "Well, your bill is going to be heard today." I said, "Well, I can't get over that. Don't worry about it." And they said, "We'll take care of it in the committee." They went ahead and voted on it. I wasn't even there. Didn't expect to be voted. Next thing I know, it's on the consent, passed out. Here at work for 3 or 4 years trying to do it, and then all of a sudden it just takes care of itself. And so, and again, that one, the governor of the veterans groups there and all this, they gave me a purple bat, a little slugger, and I didn't do anything.
Well, you just hearing you describe it, you learned a lot about how something gets done in Frankfort. You mentioned the gaming bill. I can't imagine the number of lobbyists that the gaming industry has in Kentucky. Don't tell them how many people are lobbying to get gambling legislation through in the state. And yet folks who want to oppose gambling, oftentimes they don't hear from anybody. but if they can get a phone call or two, it really makes a big difference from what I understand.
It does. And again, something like that, you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of money. I mean, the lobbyists, there's money poured in on these issues where there's money to be made like that. And so if you're against something in that order, you don't have any money to give them. You're not, we're not doing this to whatever, but you're calling in from the people. And that's where the strength is at.
Yeah.
It's in the grassroots. It's hearing from their constituents. If they hear from somebody from Pike County and they're down here, that's one thing. But if they hear from somebody in their hometown or their one, so it's strong. And that's what's, honestly, that's what stopped that. That's
great reminder.
Prayer in that, yeah.
One voice can really make a difference on a important issue, and people want to do the right thing. But as you said, having those calls from the county where the person represents can give them the additional support that they need. Well, Dwight, not only do you have a history in legislature, you also have a history with Kentucky Baptists. And so tell us about your involvement in your local church. What church are you a member of, and how are you involved there?
Well, I'm a member of Green River Memorial Baptist here in Campbellsville. And we moved here 4 years ago. So I've been going there about 3.5 years, I guess. And before that, I was with Severance Valley. I was a deacon over there for about, 10 years, I guess, when we lived there. And then before that, I was at Hardensburg Baptist.
Okay.
And that was the first Baptist church I went to. And I was a deacon down there. That's been a long time ago. But that's my home down there in that area in Hardensburg, Breckinridge County. So.
Well, so there's another role that's often misunderstood by folks. People think deacons run the church sometimes. But what's a deacon actually do? What are the traits of a good deacon?
I think it goes back to about the same as the traits of a good public servant. Honestly, you're out there to serve people. You're out there to meet their needs. You're out there if they have a problem. You're kind of the go-between, maybe, or you're the representative, and you just do what when they have a trouble or a problem or something needs to be solved, or an issue needs to be moved up to someplace else, or who do I need to call about this? It's kind of the same role, except, you're bathed in prayer, hopefully, at this, and where the public servants, maybe yes, maybe no.
You're just trying to help. You're trying to help people. Well, Dwight, so you work kind of part-time with the KBC, with the convention. You are what we would have called an issues advocate. Others would call maybe a lobbyist. And you just started this role in recent months. What made you interested in this position?
Well, as I said, I was contacted a couple of years ago by a gentleman about it who had been in it, and he was contemplating not being there anymore, and just wanted to know if I would consider. And then at that time, it was straight on the heels of COVID, right after I'd had the operation, all this, going on. And I just told him that, I just wasn't ready at that time. But I was very, interested if the time ever came forward. And so roll it forward a couple of years. Lawrence Smith, who I respect highly, called me and he asked me, about if I would consider that. And I said, let me pray about it and with my family and see what they think. And, I got the green light from them, and I felt like I got the green light from the Lord. And I asked, if something to be blocked, block it. And it wasn't. And it's been great. I really enjoy being back.
We're grateful for you in the role. And Dwight, you just mentioned COVID, and then also that you had a major surgery. So you underwent a heart transplant in 2019. That's about as major as it gets. How has that experience impacted your perspective on life?
It's made me see that life is very short, and things can change in an instant. And you have to appreciate your family and your time. After being in the hospital, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Honestly, it really was. Because you see how little you can do on your own. You're totally dependent on somebody else taking care of you. And you can't do anything. And that's what, before the surgery and things, people say, oh, aren't you concerned about that? Aren't you worried? I said, I'm not worried. the surgeon needs to be worried. I'm going to be asleep while it's going on. And if I don't wake up, I'm better off. So,
Dwight, I've got to tell you, I think I would have felt the need to help him worry just a little bit if it was me.
But that's sort of the way it is.
Well, so what's the recovery like on the other side of a heart transplant? How long does it take to be where you're kind of back up and going again?
Not as long as you'd think, actually. I had actually before that, I'd had a VAD, a heart pump put in. You heard of those before? It's a ventricular assisted device. It's just basically a pump that, you have a battery on your side, and at nighttime you plug it into the wall, and you got a cord that goes in, through your belly that operates this pump. And so that was a heart thing. Well, I had that, and that's a open heart surgery deal. So whenever I got rid of that, and then when I got the transplant, it was about, I don't know, let's see, I had the transplant in November. I was home in like the 10th of December, and you just start exercising and going again. And I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months, I was pretty much back to normal, and then COVID hit. And so that, that kind of threw everything out of whack. But other than that, I was good.
Incredible experience. Hey, let's talk a little bit about leadership. Who is one of the most effective leaders that you've had a chance to work with closely or even see from a little bit of a distance? I'm thinking about political leaders in particular.
Local or
just maybe someone in Frankfurt that you worked with or that you watched there.
That's a good question. David Williams was a very effective leader.
Yeah.
And from his eyes, David, he had the kind of personality that was, you either liked him or you didn't. And, David has changed a lot since then. I admire the way he's done and changed. But, he got things done, and he was involved in when the takeover of the Senate and the negotiations of that. That's one of these type of things that couldn't just happen, boom, overnight. But he did that. And, I was Ernie Fletcher. He was a good leader when he was in there. And, Governor Bevan, he was a good leader. I've learned from all of them. The first governor I had was Governor Jones for like a year. And, but you just, I tell you, I've been reading a lot here lately about Jimmy Carter. And he was an interesting gentleman and president, and the kind of the conflicts that he had back and forth with being a Christian and a Baptist, and trying to balance that out is interesting to see how he went through that. And he's one too that it goes back to if you can be a peanut farmer and basically just a regular guy, and you can become president. So
yeah, his story is really, really amazing. Dwight, when you think about these leaders that you've worked around and some names that you've mentioned, what are 2 or 3 traits that you notice in them that made them effective in their leadership?
I think the strongest thing is your word. Yeah. That's the thing in Frankfurt, people talking about politicians, being liars and all this, and not hedging, and that's true to a degree. But if you tell somebody something and you don't back it up, you're done. You have no authority. You can't be trusted, because it's all it's word of mouth. It's your word. You're not writing a check that or writing a statement, I'm going to vote for you, or I'm going to do this or that. And so that's what they had to have. And they had to have they had to know what they wanted. What was the end goal? Not so much how to get there, but what do I want? And that's a hard thing for most of us to grasp. We're out here and we're thinking, well, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to, it's not what's the end. I'll find out a way to get there. Yeah. But that's what they had.
What's something that you saw happen in Frankfurt, either during your time or since then, that's really surprised you? And one might be the fact that the Republican kind of takeover of the legislature. But what would you say to that? What's something that you've seen take place that's kind of surprised you?
Well, that happened quicker than I thought it would. I think I even had Speaker Stumbo's former secretary. She said, "We know it's going to happen. It's just trying to hold off. But when it did happen, it was just kind of like an avalanche.
Yeah.
And then all this pro-life legislation that had been bottled up for so long, came on through. And it was always, when I was there, it was always kind of a holding pattern, just we're going up against the wall. And then it's just like the wall crumbled. And here comes on, just like this past session. This was a great session.
Yep.
It really was. I mean, from the Christian standpoint, from just a citizen standpoint, from good government, it was a very productive session.
Well, Dwight, what are some takeaways from this session? So for folks who may not really follow Frankfurt very closely, the session starts in January, I think ends at the end of April, or around this time of year. Right. And so what are some things that happened during this session that are kind of significant, especially for believers?
Well, several bills were passed, and several of the bills were vetoed that were, pro-Christian, I would say, or the pro-life bill, like EP103, that had several things with it, moving the time back on the weeks and taking care of the fetal remains and different things like that. And it ended up being a bigger bill than, it started out to, but many good points. And so it was vetoed and it was overridden, which used to be something that didn't happen very often. And of course, now it's still, going through the court system on what's actually going to be the final outcome. But that was a big bill. In fact, I'm just glancing here at some of my notes. Senate Bill 83, the Women's Fairness and Women's Sports Bill, that was a big bill. And, there again, it just comes back to, do you want to have females against females or females against males? And what is the equality in that? What is the fairness? No matter what you believe, it comes back to what is fair. Yeah. And then the religious liberty bills, that where we had the churches shut.
The church is essential or something like that, I think was the reference. Yeah.
Yeah. 43. So, that passed. And again, and the gaming, that got stopped. These were the good ones that went through, many more, but the gaming was stopped, which did not look like it's going to happen at one time. The medical marijuana, again, whatever you believe in it, it needed to be slowed down. And the governor then, he picked up and he's going to do a study, which is, that's fine. Things need to be studied, but you got to be slow. You got to be methodical. You have to look at what you're doing. And so that's what was done. It's kind of like you've heard Ben Franklin talk about it with the Senate and the House, back in the day in Congress. And same thing here. He said the House is kind of hot and it's, kind of like a coffee cup or whatever. And the Senate is underneath it catches over and cools off. So a lot of things come through the House then it goes to the Senate and they don't hear it because it may not be time to hear it. And so we had the same type thing here, but that's where we stopped. But, those are big pieces. Those are big victories. And the state had a lot of money this time, which is unusual. But they didn't blow it all. They put a lot of it in a rainy day fund. And so there were a lot of people that wanted to spend every nickel that they had and then more, and that's what kind of we used to do back when I was in the minority.
Yeah, sure.
Because we worry about that tomorrow. Yeah. But this bunch is very physically responsible. So again, a good session. I'll have to commend them. And there's something else going back to that. What I would tell people to do, and that's what you did, publicly, is to thank them.
Yep.
We tell them what we want and we're badgering on them, if they don't do what we want, but we need to thank them when they do what, and they remember that.
We really have some incredible elected leaders, and I won't mention names of any of those. You know many of them, but we have some really godly people in elected office in Frankfurt, and boy, do our folks well to get to know some of these people and spend time with them, pray for them, and encourage them every chance you get. In fact, there are a number of pastors that are. I was surprised to see how many, not that many Baptists, but how many pastors there are. So speak to that person just for a second who may have an interest in running for elected office. What do they need to think about? What are the costs outside the financial cost? Why should a person want to consider, a Christian, a committed believer, want to consider running for elected office in Kentucky?
I think that there are many reasons. I think that the first would be to serve the Lord, really.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel called to that, you need to act on it, whether you think you can win or not. You need to make that decision. You need to pray about it, because it comes back to this: you have a responsibility. You can't be responsible to win, but you have a responsibility to run. And if you're so inclined, because someone's going to be in that position, and they might be a great person, it might be an open situation, but no matter what, somebody's going to be having the oversight of you and your children and your grandchildren and your family and your community. And, who better than yourself? You know what you'll do. That's what I always tell people. I know pretty much what I'll do. I don't know what somebody else will do, and you don't. And so it's a great opportunity. It was a great experience for me. Now, there is the cost, though, like you said. There's a time cost. There's a cost of being away from your family. There's a cost to them, because you become kind of a little celebrity. So you go to Walmart, and while you're, any store, while you're there, they're telling you stuff, because now you belong to them, kind of. You're their public official. So it doesn't matter if your kids are along with your wife, whatever. They're going to come, and you're going to need to talk to them. They don't like it much. The family doesn't, and you can't blame them. See, and that's what after a while it wears on them. And
folks in ministry especially are used to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
So speak to it just for a second, and we'll wrap up. Help people understand why their phone calls, their emails, their relationships with their elected leaders. Why do those relationships make a difference, and why must believers continue to try and let folks know how we view the issues that come up in Frankfort?
The relationships mean everything, because if you know someone, you're more apt to listen to them. If you know them, why does someone win their precinct and may lose every other precinct around? Because the people know them.
Yep.
Whether they like them or not, they know them. They know they can get in touch with them if something happens. And that's the same principle. If you stay in touch, or if you just tell them thanks, or just how are you doing, whatever, you're just staying in touch with them, email, text anymore, phone calls. Then when something comes up, they're more apt to listen to you, because they know you to a degree. If you're a stranger, I might listen to you, I might not. Chances are, I'm less apt to. But in the same token, even the ones that have voted, people are not going to vote for you every issue every time. And we need to keep that in mind. But you still need to respect the office, and you need to let them know that you appreciate the things they have done, more so than trash them. It's like this is a time to build relationships after all this is over, and you're not trying to get them to do something. You're not. It's kind of like when you're politicking, you go to a picnic, you're campaigning. And when you go in an election year, people expect you to be there. And if you're not, it's a negative. If you're elected, they don't expect you. And so it's a positive. And that's when you build relationships. Constant campaigning, constant relationship building. It's all the same. No difference.
So if folks want to reach out to their elected leader, they can go to ky.gov, I think, and find out who your senator, who your representative is. This would be a great time to send them an email, make a phone call, introduce yourself, and you might get a chance to meet them and just pray for them and express appreciation.
And that's something you hit on right there too. I've had a lot of there's a group that goes and they pray with the legislators, and they will go, and I was talking to them. They said, we prayed with just great majority of them, which is really good, and they appreciate that. but we need to be doing it without them knowing it. I mean, they need to know it, but
Yep.
whether they do or not, we need to do it.
Well, Dwight, thank you for your service to the Lord through serving as a state representative. Thank you now for your work. You're advocating for the issues that Kentucky Baptists care about. We're grateful for you, and thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gray. I appreciate it. It's been an honor to be here, and look forward to working with you in the future.